Who will be the next president of South Africa? Because 2029 may seem like a long way away. That's our next national general election to elect a president. But because our current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is in his last term in office and won't be able to run again, the machinations over who is going to succeed him to lead this country have already started. They've been rumbling for years, but have slowly but surely got more intense in the last few months, and even in the last few weeks and days have really ramped up another notch. So let's talk about it. Is the next president of South Africa going to be from the ANC? Is there any chance of another political party like having any stab of getting the most votes in 2029? And if not, if it is going to be another ANC president, who does it look like is getting their ducks in a row to take power of the African National Congress? This is the issue with who will be our next president. You're watching The Issue with Dan Corder. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. And before we get into this big story, if you still don't know, we have a weekday morning news worth knowing podcast about South Africa called Dan Corder in the Morning, available on Spotify and Apple. Every single morning, Monday to Friday, we talk about the biggest news, the developing news and stories, and most important people in the country as the stories unfold and as the weeks and months develop. We also have a WhatsApp line where listeners, recorders, contribute to the show with voice notes and texts. It's really a dialogical community as we learn to figure out better what is happening in South Africa and where we as a country are going. So join us there, search Dan Corder in the Morning on Spotify or Apple. It's absolutely free, and join our WhatsApp community by saving the number 0607 613 436. Okay. First things first, is the next president going to be from the African National Congress? It is only 2025, 2029 is a long way away, and we still have a local government election in 2026, which could have some effect on the narratives, the perception of success or failure, and how seriously different political parties should be taken by South Africans. Local government elections do have an effect on the perception of political parties by the public in a country, and so can affect whether or not people feel like it is worth voting for and supporting certain political parties. But also, quite often, local government elections have very little bearing on how people vote nationally, because, to take the EFF as an example, just not finding any local EFF leaders inspiring enough to get out and vote for them in local government does not often affect the way that many EFF voters feel about Julius Malema, and they will turn out and vote for him when it comes to national. So 2026 is going to be a big fork in the road for a lot of political parties. But the way it is now looking, it seems extremely likely that the next leader of South Africa will be from the African National Congress. Now, I know you're thinking, but Dan, isn't the ANC falling apart? Isn't a lot of their success based on how well-liked President Ramaphosa is? He's by far the most powerful and best supported politician in the country, way more popular than the African National Congress. You've been saying, Dan, that Ramaphosa is not going to be able to run again. How can this be? Well, firstly, we need to remember that as badly as the ANC did in the last election, they still got nearly twice as many votes as the next party. They got 2 votes out of 5. The next biggest party, the DA, only got 1 vote, just over 1 vote out of 5 people who voted. So the chasm, the gap between the ANC and the rest is still huge, absolutely enormous, particularly considering the fact that no party except the ANC has ever, in modern South Africa, got higher than the 21-ish% that the DA got last time out. It's a massive gap. Even the aforementioned EFF, who seem like such a massive deal because of how they are in the media, got 10% in the last election? That's just 1 in 10 of the voters. And then we need to talk about MK, because Jacob Zuma's MK party is the main reason why the ANC went down so much in the last election. They took most of those votes and plenty of votes from the Economic Freedom Fighters. They ended up coming in third at over 14% of the vote. Since that election, the MK party has been a shambles. We've already covered on this channel Floyd Shivambu, Duduzile Zuma, all of the different infighting, John Hlophe, the fact that they continually have done so badly at by-elections since the last national general election, and the fact that Jacob Zuma is not going to be on the ballot in the 2026 local government election. So it's going to be much like a by-election, and by then the MK party could have run out of energy. And whether or not Zuma is going to be politically active in 2029 at the age of, I think, 87, that remains to be seen also. So the big reason why the ANC lost a lot of their vote, particularly in KZN, the MK party, does not look like they're in a healthy position to even matter or be consequential, or certainly not grow much more than they already have come 2029. The EFF has struggled to evolve from the disaster of last year, from their election results to all of these different major people leaving, the fights between Julius Malema and the rest. So they don't look like they're going to go either. The DA seems to have hit a glass ceiling. We don't know if Steenhuisen is still going to be the presidential candidate for the Democratic Alliance by 2029, but they barely grew bigger than under Steenhuisen than they were under the allegedly so disastrous Musi Maimane. And there are no other political parties that look like they're going to be able to take a significant chunk. So as poorly as the ANC did, the main reason why they did poorly is not in a good way, MK, and nobody else really seems capable of coming close. So maybe there'll be a world in 2029 when the ANC drops to, say, 35 or 30%. And then it would be possible for a lot of other political parties. It was possible just last time for a lot of other political parties to get together and to try and create a ruling government without the ANC. But there aren't any other major enough players to be able to pull this off at this point. And as much as 3 to 4 years is a long time in politics, long enough to overwhelm the ANC support base, unlikely. Let's assume nothing radical happens and the ANC gets somewhere between 35 and 45% of the vote in 2029. Let's assume that then allows them to form a government with a handful of smaller political parties to get over 50%. That means that the ANC will provide our next president of the country. Now, what is happening with that? Because it's been a crazy, even just last week. You may have seen the fact that the KwaZulu-Natal ANC leadership was completely overhauled. And quite a lot of people were saying that if you read the tea leaves of which people in the KZN leadership were demoted or removed from power and which people would put in place, it looks quite a lot like one of the ANC's most powerful people, Fikile Mbalula, is arranging different factions to support his potential rumored run to be the next president of the ANC in 2027, which is the next elective conference. Now, I have to remind you of something really important. Although the word in the street is that Ramaphosa is not going to want to run again to remain ANC president even after he can't be South Africa's president anymore, he could still do so. There are no term limits on how many times someone can be ANC president. So in 2027, in the next elective conference, if Ramaphosa chooses to run again, he will probably win. His faction dominates the African National Congress, and there'll probably be someone from within his faction who is then put forward to be the president of South Africa. I will say, though, that this would be pretty remarkable and unusual because, as I'm sure you know, almost inevitably what happens when there's a potential new president who needs to be selected for the country is there is a new president of the African National Congress. It happened with Jacob Zuma, following on from Thabo Mbeki. It happened with Ramaphosa, following on from Zuma. So maybe Ramaphosa won't run again. Maybe he won't even win a runoff if he chooses to run as president of the ANC again, although he almost certainly will. But assuming Ramaphosa chooses not to run again, it will almost certainly still be somebody from his faction, which dominates the party so much, who is the next ANC leader. Fikile Mbalula has looked for a long time and been speculated for a long time to be trying to be that guy. But even just in the last few days, he came out and said that he believes in ANC tradition. And the ANC tradition he's referring to is that the vice president becomes the president. So Paul Mashatile is the current vice president of the ANC and South Africa. He would become the president according to ANC tradition. The thing is, though, that ANC tradition around who would become president was kind of broken when Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma chose to run against Cyril Ramaphosa to be the new president of the African National Congress, because tradition stated it was supposed to be Ramaphosa because he was the vice president, but instead the Zuma faction, broadly the Radical Economic Transformation faction, chose to go with Dlamini Zuma, and quite a lot of other constituencies of the ANC around the country followed her too. So as much as the ANC used to be a political party of ironclad tradition where it was clear that they would follow the precedent, that's not the case anymore. And so Mbalula can say that he thinks that Mashatile should be the next president because he's the vice president, but it may not happen. Also, remember, Mashatile has only just become the vice president recently because it was David Mabuza. So we're not sure that the tradition will be followed. So then let's talk about Paul Mashatile. He's kept a relatively low profile in the last few years since becoming vice president. He's largely just made sure that he's the vice president. The most high profile thing that happened with him was when his bodyguards assaulted those everyday South African citizens on the side of a highway. But he's managed to step away from and dodge any of the negative fallout from that. Basically, the guards, the protection units have taken total fall for that incident. Mashatile doesn't work very hard to create public support for him. He doesn't go out and try to solicit endorsements and attention. But he is extremely well supported and his power is entrenched within the African National Congress. And this is where we need to remember that even though we live in a modern world where a lot of politicians like Fikile Mbalula are able to become extremely high profile by using broadcast media, by using social media to raise their profile and garner public endorsement and support, ultimately the ANC still tries to treat itself like a party that chooses the best person from within their party, the most appropriate one. And so if you want to become superpowered within the African National Congress, you still need to make sure that you are superpowered in the party. It's more important than getting lots of public acclaim and high profile attention beyond the party, although that's slowly starting to change a little bit. And because Mashatile is so powerful within the party, because he has got extraordinarily effective and impactful business and political connections, and because he's already the vice president, it looks like he will probably be the next president at this stage. And I need to remind you that Fikile Mbalula has always been referred to the early warning weather system of the African National Congress, because that man always picks the right team, even as teams are fighting for who's going to be the new winning team. Fikile Mbalula was with Zuma. He then jumped Ramaphosa at exactly the right moment. He's got a lot of other things right about rising and falling members of the African National Congress. And for him to come out and say it should be Mashatile next, we can probably infer means that the sentiment within the party right now is that it is most likely going to be Mashatile who is the next leader. Now, of course, there are dark horses. We all know about Premier of Gauteng, Panyaza Lesufi, and how badly he wants to be the ultimate power in the ANC and South Africa. We know that he has brazenly and openly fought against Fikile Mbalula and the ANC national leadership. He did it as recently as last year when trying to form a local government in Gauteng. We know that he has been willing to enrage and cross a bunch of powerful people in the ANC. But he doesn't have much of a constituency beyond Gauteng, and as recently as a week ago, he publicly apologized to President Cyril Ramaphosa for the disastrous state of Johannesburg and other parts of Gauteng that looks set to be an embarrassment for the country when the G20 heads of state arrive at the end of the year, unless there's a radical and rapid cleaning operation and fixing of the city operation. And so the fact that Lesufi's had a bad time recently, the fact that he's consistently crossed high-ranking members of the ANC means is probably unlikely at this point that he has enough power and sway and influence to be the next leader. And then there are some dark horses who people love to talk about, but based on what I've just described, they seem unlikely to get anywhere this time round at least. Ronald Lamola is a great example. A rising star, a young leader, popular in the ANC, popular with the presidency, popular in the majority of South Africa's viewpoint, has a high-profile ministerial position now in Durko. He was the justice minister. And so he looks like a rising star, but he doesn't have the level of constituency support and backing within the ANC to make a run for president versus the likes of Paul Mashatile. The big twist, though, to all of this analysis is what I said earlier, which is that President Ramaphosa's team runs the African National Congress. And whether Ramaphosa chooses to run again and remain ANC president or not, ultimately Ramaphosa's faction's pick may well have enough power right now to get whoever they pick to the presidency. So maybe, there is a world in which Cyril picks a successor who doesn't have much of a constituency, doesn't have much profile, doesn't have much backing within the ANC, but Cyril manages to get his side, his faction in line, and elevates that person to the presidency. But let me reiterate, it's happening right now. The jockeying has already started. The succession plans have already been discussed and already being fought over. And we need to pay attention because the future of our country is heavily dependent on who our next president is going to be. And that president is kind of being picked already. The fight over who that president will be has already started. Thank you for watching.